2 o'clock on my watch. I think we start with some housekeeping issues. I want to say a very warm welcome to all of you, especially to our president, the president of ESCAP, Dimitris Agnostopoulos, who will address you with his welcome message just after my first technical start. We are glad that you joined us for that improvised symposium. We thought it's very important to be fast because we have the problems now and we have to confront them, and we have to try to help and support refugees, refugee children and their mothers that came from Ukraine in all our countries. Therefore we didn't pay for expensive webinar, but Zoom, and I have to thank them, allowed us to enlarge our normal account so we can accept all people that want to take part today. But to have a good connection, I would ask everybody who is not speaking to turn off the video. Only the speakers of the symposium will have their videos on. We will record this meeting because many colleagues wrote me that they have patients between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but they want to see our session. We are already more than 100 people there, and I'm very glad that you came, but we will put the video of that meeting on our ESCAP homepage, and everybody is welcome to see that video there. So if you have a question on your video screen when you enter the video, whether you accept recording, please press accept, because if not, you are not allowed to follow the meeting. I'm glad that all the speakers that will intervene in the afternoon accepted to come here. If you have any questions, please write it down in the chat. There was a first question from a colleague where she can see the video. It will be on our homepage. And now I first hand over to the president of the European Society of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, Professor Dimitris Agnostopoulos. Dimitris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jörg. Dear colleagues, a very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of ESCAP. Today's ESCAP seminar is organized on the initiative of the Policy Division of our society under the guidance of Professor Jörg Fegert, whom I would like to publicly thank you very much for his continuous efforts, very active and very productive, let me say, efforts to support ESCAP goals as a total, and especially for this initiative which tackling the problem which arises from the ongoing war in Ukraine nowadays. This is one more initiative of ESCAP to meet the needs of our colleagues as they arise from the war impact to our professional life in the everyday clinical practice. The main concern of our society is to protect, provide, and enhance the mental health of children, adolescents, and their families. For us, the professionals on mental health of children and families, the only actually weapon which we have in our disposition is science. For us, then, promoting the knowledge and skills of the members of our professional community, namely but not only, child and adolescent psychiatrists. We think that in this way we serve in the best way our aim. Also, it is our duty, ESCAP duty, to advocate for the rights of children based on our substantiated scientific knowledge. It is exactly in this spirit that ESCAP has worked, and it is still working, to deal with all the major crises, social crises, and their heavy impact to the life of the children and families, which have followed the one after the other since the beginning of this century. The economic crisis, the big problem of the refugees issue, the pandemic and its impact to our lives. And of course, we cannot remain indifferent to the war and its aftermath that broke out in our continent after the Russian invasion to Ukraine. For all these activities and interventions and initiatives of our society, you can be informed visiting and following both our website and our journal. Before giving the floor to George, I would like to thank him once again, along with his team at the University of Ulm and the university itself, which actually provide us the opportunity, giving us all the necessary technical facilities to realize this webinar. Also, I would like to thank you, the distinguished colleagues who will share with us their experiences and knowledge. Of course, all the colleagues on the board of directors of ESCAP. And closing, I want to emphasize in our respect, appreciation, and solidarity to all our fellow child psychiatrists across the continent, as well to the mental health workers who work continuously under adverse conditions due to the constant and prolonged crises that characterize our time. And finally, last but not least, especially our colleagues who are in the front line in the areas affected by the violence of war. Dear Georg, the floor is yours now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dimitris. Thank you very, very much for that very kind introduction. And again, some housekeeping questions. There are some colleagues that still have their microphones on. Please turn them off because we have noises in our connection. Thank you for turning off your microphones. So this morning we had a conversation at Aktion Psychisch Kranke, Action Mental Health, which is a German organization from the 70s that works together with Parliament. And we have parliamentarians from all the parties in the German Bundestag and specialists and patient representatives. And their question was, is the flight situation, is forced displacement now primarily a question for psychiatry? And we said, no. It's first about safety and to give a safe place, to give schooling to children, just to follow the agenda of children's rights of the UN. Our place is perhaps much more in the guidance of local initiatives, in doing counseling and in doing intervention if there is a suicidal crisis or if there are traumatic problems that really give severe problems to a child. or if you have the situation of bereavement, if a father dies in the war and there is an actual intervention needed. But I think there are many steps to follow, and our initiative today is just to support colleagues and to make them strong in their communities, because I think many support is organized at a community level. I think if we compare that situation to the 2015 situation, when ESCAP also was very, very active under your guidance, Dimitris, the situation is in some way different because war comes nearer to us. And as many people that went away from Syria could not hope to go back, nearly all people from Ukraine I spoke with hope to be back within weeks or months. So we have to talk about the situation here. They can't forget the place where is home. They need connections via internet, via telephone to their families over there. And the motivation to learn German language or our languages in our countries is a different one if you don't expect to stay for a long time. So we have to discuss about schooling. And there are so many well-educated mothers that came with their children. There are many teachers among these mothers. So perhaps we could find means of integrating these mothers as assistant teachers in our school settings. I think we have to be creative about that. And the German Society of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and I spoke with the president, Professor Kölch, this morning, has a 10-point plan for our government. And they said that we should use simple diagnostic tools to sort out those who need immediate help and those who just need support and a safe situation. Then they said we should stabilize all young people in our societies, children and adolescents, because also our German, our French, our Dutch children see on the TV the war situation and are horrified. And we have already a rise in anxiety over the last 2 years with the corona pandemic. And the new situation is another threat to our daily lives. So I think it's important to talk about it and to stabilize the situation. We should encourage children that came with their mothers to our countries to go to school, and we should make it possible that they can go to school. They have the right of schooling according to our law, for example, in Germany. And then we need to create confidence by networking. I think safety can be constituted in the community. It's not something that the governments can make alone. They have to support it top down. But really acceptance and help can be made in our communities. And it's important that all the medical needs are served, and therefore the system, the health system, has to pay for. One huge problem in Germany, I don't know how it is in other countries, is that within the health system, we don't pay for translation services. And this is really crucial because our tool that we are working with is language, and we have to understand and we have to talk. So I think this is also a political aim, and the German society also stated, and I think that's also true for the board of ESCAP, that help for children is free of discrimination. We don't take part in the conflict, but we are very on the side of all the children that suffer from that conflict. Yeah, and ESCAP is a society that is much larger than the European Union. It includes the Turkish society, the Russian society, and the Ukrainian society. And in all the countries, children are suffering from that situation. And it's very important for us that we are free of discrimination if we talk about help and support. So I had the chance to meet last week a young colleague, a child psychotherapist from Ukraine, who came here to Ulm with her 10-year-old daughter. And in the evening, when there was no place, a family not far from my home gave her shelter, and she lives there now. And her host brought me in contact with her, and we are fighting with our administration to hire her at our place, because she can give a lot of support. She speaks Russian and Ukrainian, and she's the ideal person to do work now for the refugees in our region. And I hope we will manage to hire her at my department. Our administration is always slow. I think you find out in every country, but she was very fast and quick, and she accepted to give a short statement to our meeting from her perspective as a mother of a 12-year-old forcibly displaced from Ukraine, but also as a child psychotherapy specialist. So she has two very authentic views, and I pass over to Lilia Kuznetsova.
Good evening, good afternoon. I'm sorry, but I will read. Thank you for your understanding. I'm a mother, a victim of the war in Ukraine, and I'm a psychologist. Perhaps my reflection can help a little to form an impression about us, refugees, and our needs. I'm from Kharkiv, which is bombed since 24th of February. We had a long way to get to Germany. We have been living in New Ulm from 10th of March. My daughter Vasilisa is 12 years old. I, as her mother, can't do anything to protect the city, but I was able to take her out. And I can talk to her, I can cry, be confused, be angry, and keep talking. We had lovely private school, hobby classes for Vasilisa, a big external family, my pretty successful career and plans, in general comfortable life in Ukraine. We became refugees with a small set of things and an uncertain future. What helped us as a people? Messages from distant acquaintance. I have a place where you can be received. Go to Ulm, you will be met. We knew where we need to get and knew that Yelena and her family is waiting for us. We have a plan. Predictability of events as far as it can now be possible, understanding what support is possible, and our next 2 or 3 steps. When I, as a caring adult, made a plan and became less anxious, my daughter felt better. It gave me and her hope and strength. We had a most necessary comfortable clothes and did not need it. We also had some money to drink warm tea and buy food, shampoo, or new clean socks. At this point, it's easier to feel like you're still a person. It was a surprise to remember one more detail. whatever we stayed, people asked us how we got there, what was difficult, how is it at home. At that moment, I did not understand the importance of this, but my daughter and I described each time and could share our feelings and keep our opportunity for reflection. When we were going to, we planned to live in a shelter. I thought it would be easier and more correct, does not cause trouble for people, but to be in a place specially arranged for us. But in the shelter were only common rooms, not any for two. We were invited by family, and so we accidentally arrived in their house. We were able to start a conversation because we can speak English. Of course, being guests are unusual and not a simple task. We used to live in our own house, make our own decisions, have schedules and habits. Along with the difficulties, there are many pleasant things in life in the family, such as we made a registration and other documents. I think that without help, it would be very difficult for me. Katya found a place in a private English-speaking school for my daughter, and the official sources did not mention the school. And since 21st of March, my daughter has been going to the school with children from different countries. I think it's great for her. She has new buddies. There is one Russian-speaking girl, and her class is very friendly atmosphere that allows her to adapt. Katya asked all her friends about the possibility of job for me. It would have been more difficult for me to start this search on my own. Her activity and knowledge of the city and opportunities has accelerated this process. We practiced English and learned some German. We get to know people who live nearby, and we begin to include. I think that important conditions for a very comfortable life are definite terms of our accommodation. Is it possible now? Common interests and values, flexibility in communication and interest in each other, respect for the rules and privacy. The opportunity to discuss the details of the rules of life in the house. As I understand, till this time, my daughter and other children are also supported and feel more calm by the daily routine. This is breakfast, walk, calls to relatives, reading, and a shower, and so on. The explanation of today's possibility limitation. For example, we couldn't buy games or clothes, but we can buy a delicious bun, notebooks, pens, and large blocks for school. Description of reality of our native city, family, and lovely people. In Kharkiv, the building of university was destroyed. The Russian language teacher got to her daughter. She already wrote. One more, keep in touch with loved ones. To know that dad and grandmother are alive in Kharkiv. Where other relatives are right now and how their day went. News about neighbors, classmates. It was difficult to imagine where they are right now and keep this information in mind about my friends. And we decided to print a map and mark who and where. Description of ordinary life in traditions in Germany, walks, going, shopping, knowing people near you. Talks or be in touch with parents or close people who can support and allow the child to experience a variety of feelings and also give time for this experience and adaptation, and do not rush. Attempts to discuss philosophical questions. Why does reason not prevail over aggression? Why exactly our city and our country? Why will what will happen next time. These questions do not have answers, but I think that are important to discuss with children. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you. So there are many comments, there are hearts on the screens. So thank you very, very much. And you are right that children, especially like your daughter in puberty, they need to ask these philosophical questions and to challenge us with these questions, and we have to discuss it. So this was very moving, and I thank you. You're very brave. You said in your talk, don't hurry, don't rush us. I know that I'm always impatient and pushing, and so I'm a bit sorry that I pushed you to come here, but I think it was very, very important to have an authentic view of how you are coping with the situation. Thank you very much again. Thank you. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce David Bürgin. David Bürgin is a young colleague from Basel in Switzerland, and together with the team of Klaus Schmeck, Mark Schmid, we for many, many years did research in institutionalized children in Germany and Switzerland together. And we had many huge projects for the Swiss government where Ulm had the evaluation part and Basel made the intervention part. And David is part of that team, and he was very interested by the foundation of our Trauma Research Center here in Ulm. So he is not only in a team that is a bridge between the two cities, but he is also in his person a bridge between two cities, because he has a contract here at my university and his main contract in Basel. And 2 or 3 days after the beginning of the war, he sent me an email and asked me, what can we do to help? And what could I do? And I said, if you could search literature, that would be wonderful, because it takes a lot of time and we need an overview on what is happening. And Anne-Marie Christensen from Denmark, she's part of our board, at the same time wrote in our chat of the board, shouldn't we do something from ESCAP to react to that situation? And then we started to work on an editorial that summarizes in some way the knowledge we have from the literature, and on the other side, describing a program of support that is derived from the literature. And so it's now David's role to present that paper in our conference, in our symposium today. David, I hand over to you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Is my screen already shared?
Yes, we can see your screen. Excellent.
Awesome. So thank you very much, Professor Fegert, for the short introduction. Thank you to the president of ESCAP and the board for organizing the symposium. I'd like to be honest with you up front. For me, it is not easy to give this talk about the impact of war and forced displacement on child mental health after what all of us have been witnessing in the news during the last weeks, and after what our dear Ukrainian colleague has just told us. This war, seeing these pictures, hearing the stories, makes me personally speechless and heartbroken. It overwhelms, it sickens, it And I personally feel sorry for what you, Mrs. Kuznetsova, your family and people are forced to endure. Your courage and the resiliency of your people is a true inspiration. So thank you very much from my side for speaking up. In the next half hour, I'm going to give a professional lecture about the impact of war on child mental health. And I think it's important to discuss and address this issue right away to anticipate best ways how we can help. And I guess this is the idea behind the paper and the symposium. So I promise to give my very best in the next minutes in trying to provide you all with a scoping overview about the scientific literature with the hope to help guide mental health efforts as a response to this ongoing crisis. Crusha Machel, human rights activist and former First Lady of Mozambique and South Africa, said in 1996 that children are both a reason to eliminate the worst aspects of armed conflict and at the same time a best hope of succeeding in that charge. To make the presentation short, she is still right. Since 1989, children officially have rights stated and documented within the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And these rights include the right to life, to health, to development, to have a name, a nationality, and a legal identity. This convention bans discrimination of children and calls and mandates for the protection of children's interests. In 1996, Crusha Machel was appointed by the Secretary General to study how to protect children from the adverse effects of armed conflict. And in her report to the General Assembly in 1996, she recommended the imminent need for an optional protocol. Following these efforts, in a later resolution in the year 2000, the United Nations Security Council adopted this Convention on the Rights of the Child with an optional protocol about the rights of the child on the involvement of children in armed conflict. In this document, they determined that violence against children in armed conflict poses a threat to durable peace, security, and development. And this includes that children have the right to get help if they have been hurt, neglected, treated badly, or affected by war, so they can get back their health and dignity. The infliction of war and military aggression upon children can thus be considered a violation of children's basic human rights. Children exposed to war, those living in conflict zones, on the flight and forced to migrate, may have an increased risk for broad consequences of direct and indirect effects of war on their physical as well as mental health. War deprives children from developmental opportunities and basic resources. And the risks inflicted by war, they are manifold and might have lifelong impacts on children's mental health, well-being, and development. Within UNICEF's recent report on the state of the world's children in 2021, the current COVID pandemic is considered the tip of the mental health iceberg, which has been ignored for too long. The mental health burden being inflicted on children by the recent war in Ukraine is a part of the iceberg with the potential to sink the ship. So what's the idea and thus the aim of our scoping policy editorial? We wanted to help guide mental health support for young victims of war by first providing an overview of the direct and indirect burden of war on child mental health, and by second, providing an overview of multi-level, need-oriented and trauma-informed approaches to regaining and sustaining outer and inner security after exposure to the trauma of war. So we get started with the first part of our article. William Ewell said in 2003 in one of his lectures that it does not take much imagination to think of the experiences children may have had in fleeing from their homes under threat, witnessing fighting and destruction, seeing violent acts directed at their loved ones, leaving their friends and possessions behind, marching or being transported in crowded vehicles. And we all were witnesses of such events in the last weeks. Children exposed to war and flight show a broad range of possible distress and stress reactions. As for instance, reactions shown in these illustrations. Children might, under stress, cannot focus that well. They might get angry more easily. They might not sit still like they did before. They might have difficulty sleeping, feel sad or guilty, worry, they cry, they feel tired and sad. Some children show very specific fears or dependent behaviors and a lack of interest in their environment, whereas others might show aggressive behaviors. War also reflects on children's play patterns that can include themes of war, social withdrawal, and play, different kind of play patterns. Such stress reactions can be broad and manifold and include not only emotional, but also physical and psychosomatic reactions and responses to stress. As for instance, in headaches, in different sort of pains, having an upset stomach, change in appetite, a lump in the throat, heavy chest or tight muscles. Understanding these stress reactions, it is important to appreciate that it's not merely the objective nature of specific traumatic and stressful experiences that are important, but how each child subjectively perceives, appraises, and interprets such experiences. And thus there can be huge differences in children's stress reactions to what from the outside may look like a similar experience. Also, it's important to acknowledge that children respond quite differently to stress and to trauma, depending on their age and thus their developmental level, and that it is necessary to understand such stress reactions in children within the context of their social, emotional, and cognitive development. And considering such age-specific stress reactions, two colleagues will present on helpful materials describing such stress reactions in specific age ranges after this very talk. Next to immediate stress reactions in children, reviews and meta-analysis across studies show a higher prevalence rates of specific mental disorders among children during and after conflict compared to children that were not exposed to war. Most of these individual studies have focused mainly on PTSD as primary outcome, whereas others also assessed depression and anxiety disorders and other specific mental disorders. Overall, the studies show that there's a large heterogeneity in prevalence rates between specific studies across different contexts, and thus exact prevalence rates to be expected are hard to elucidate and are depending on the time frame of assessment. In regard to this point, two things seem important to me to add. First, as many stress reactions are normal behavior within abnormal circumstances. And most children are astonishingly resilient over time. So we need to be careful to not over-pathologize these immediate stress reactions, while at the same time we need to be sensitized to closely observe, monitor, diagnose, and provide adequate help where symptoms and syndromes might manifest over time. The second point I'd like to add is that there are many studies in children investigating risk factors for post-traumatic stress disorder that show that pre-trauma factors and objective measures associated with certain events itself create only small to medium effects in regard to PTSD risk, whereas medium to large effects are found for many factors associated with such subjective experiences of the event, and with post-trauma factors such as having low social support, having ongoing perceived life threat, social withdrawal, or poor family functioning. Meaning that what happens after experiencing such events and exposures is very important for child adjustment and development of psychopathology over time. And this phase is open for intervention, for prevention, targeted at reducing harm. Over and beyond these immediate stress reactions and the risk for psychopathology over time, children lose their safe places and environments they're embedded in, with consequent high levels of prolonged stress. And thus children exposed to war are robbed of their safety at these multiple levels, from the individual feeling of being safe, the loss of normal family life and routines, to being away from friends, their homes, communities, neighborhoods, cities, and their countries, with resulting higher levels of stress over time. One specific aspect within this loss of safety is that children during war often become separated from one or both parents, as seen in recent pictures in the news and in what we just heard a couple of minutes ago. Research on attachment has shown the adverse consequences of deprivation and separation from parents in a variety of different contexts and circumstances. Overall, research has also found that parent-child interaction might have consistently negative effects on children's development over time. What studies also show is that that consequences are more severe when separation is prolonged or comes together with other forms of deprivation or victimization. And this underlines the urgent need to reunite families as soon as possible. So taken together, the impact of war on children is tremendous, ranging from immediate stress responses and increased risk for specific mental disorders to the broad consequences of separation from parents and the loss of safety across these different levels of environment. And thus children's experiences during and directly after war are in marked contrast with the need and right to develop in a safe, secure, and predictable environment. So what can be done? How can we care for those in need of a collective efforts? This is what we try to summarize in the second part of our paper, where we have tried to use some guiding frameworks to address different important general principles for concrete levels of aid and intervention. And to do so, we introduced 3 guiding frameworks and general approaches, along which we then aligned the aid and intervention approaches and literature. And you will see that these 3 multi-level, needs-oriented and trauma-informed approaches are interconnected in their ideas. The first guiding scheme, and this is the pyramid you see on the right-hand side, is more of a systems and services perspective, and is derived from the multi-layer intervention pyramid for mental health and psychosocial support in emergencies, which was proposed by the Interagency Standing Committee in 2007. And as you can see, this pyramid includes 4 levels of intervention. At the very bottom, you see basic services and security, above which we see the level of community and family support, focused non-specialized support, and at the very top, we have specialized support systems. According to this overall guideline from the Interagency Standing Committee, interventions supporting war-affected children should be comprehensible, they should be sustainable, and they should be devoid of further harm. Support, according to this guideline, should be multi-layered, it should be resilience-oriented, and it should be multidisciplinary and tailored to the needs of subgroups and individuals. In such a multi-level understanding of intervention, all these different layers of the pyramid are important and should ideally all be implemented at the same time according to the specific needs of the individual that needs help. The second framework, and that's a pyramid on the left-hand side, is the well-known pyramid of needs from Maslow. Considering this pyramid, the basic needs of every child include basic physiological and safety needs, including the need for shelter and food, the need for safety and security, the need for continuity of care by a loved one, and the need for good schooling and opportunities to develop and thrive. Whether living in a war zone, being on the flight, or staying in a new country that offers refuge, children's needs should be properly assessed and accordingly met, from the more basic physiological needs and moving up along this pyramid. Thus, help should be multi-leveled, it should be needs-oriented, and all help efforts and interventions should be aligned with the principles of trauma-informed care, and as such grounded in an understanding of and responsiveness to the impact of trauma. Trauma-informed care emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety for both providers of care and survivors of trauma. The principles of trauma-informed care aim to create opportunities for survivors of trauma to rebuild a sense of control, of self-efficacy, of empowerment. Trauma-informed care is built around these three important pillars of safety, human connections, and managing emotions. And thus it tries to translate trauma research into practice to inform and improve care efforts and to practically address trauma and promote resilience in those affected. So taken together with these three guiding frameworks, we sorted the literature, and this includes a multi-layered approach, a needs-oriented approach, and an approach that is trauma-informed in its general principles. So what can be done at the concrete levels of intervention? At the lower levels of these pyramids, we need to provide immediate aid and intervention. And these basic services include the provision of food, of shelter, of water, of basic healthcare. And these should be established in participatory, in safe, and in socially appropriate ways. It's important to provide children with safety and a sense of security, as well as at the same time addressing their basic needs while establishing trust with the child. Such non-specific interventions have the goal to reduce immediate stress, to provide safe areas and child-friendly shelters, to restore or reactivate protective factors. On the top of that, or better next to that, psychological first aid might help in these immediate efforts. And psychological first aid consists of 8 core actions that address contact and engagement in a first step, that provide safety and comfort, that aim to stabilize the current situation, that include information gathering, that include practical assistance and connections with social support, the gathering of coping resources, of protective factors, and linkage with collaborative services. When guiding help efforts, it is important to acknowledge that some children might only require a sense of safety and support by family and close others, whereas other children might be in need of more complex and focused psychosocial support that addresses the different stress reactions and emotional and behavioral problems that manifest over time. And thus a phased model of aid and a stepped care approach is needed. And this includes having appropriate assessment tools at hand and to use validated instruments and questionnaires to assess mental health burdens, but also needs and protective resources. Such tools can be implemented in online environments and made accessible. And we'll hear about one such possibility, which is implemented in Porta, a tool that was developed in 2015 by the University of Ulm, right after this talk as well. Based on such individual assessments of the burden and needs of children, appropriate, effective, and efficacious evidence-based treatments should be made available when indicated. And different evidence-based programs and treatments exist, and these range from lower threshold group-based interventions that can be implemented by non-specialists to individual evidence-based trauma-focused psychotherapy by highly trained professionals. With such a stepped care approach in mind, interventions with lower participation thresholds that are broader accessible, having fewer sessions, can be implemented earlier in the process of forced migration. and can be implemented in group-based settings as well. Many of these evidence-based programs and interventions have common elements that are included in their treatment manuals. And these common elements include access promotion, making treatment accessible, psychoeducation for children and parents, talk about these kind of stress reactions, and that some stress reactions are normal reactions within abnormal circumstances. They include insight building and report techniques, cognitive strategies, how to manage stress, the use of narratives, some sort of exposure techniques, and relapse prevention. So these common elements are, we find them in many different sorts of treatment, and these might be helpful for new and adapted interventions that are currently being developed. So overall, there's a growing body of research that demonstrates the efficacy and effectiveness of evidence-based interventions from these lower threshold and short-term group-based interventions up to long-term individualized and evidence-based psychotherapy. Such interventions, if indicated and accessible, should be made available. For long-term help, it is also important to provide appropriate physical infrastructures and social environments that foster mental health of children and their parents. And studies show worse mental health outcomes, which are seen in refugees living in institutional accommodations having restricted economic opportunities. So that humanitarian aid that improves living conditions is likely to have a positive impact on mental health as well. Also, factors after migration may moderate the ability of those seeking refuge to recover from pre-migration trauma. And this underlines the importance to address these post-migration stressors and the structures to improve mental health in the long run. With a trauma-informed perspective, infrastructures and social environments are needed that provide children with the opportunity to develop in a safe environment that is child appropriate and child friendly in regard to social interaction, in regard to education and strength promotion. So taken together, post-migration structures are needed that suit the higher needs of children over and beyond providing initial basic services and safety. And this includes social interactions with other children, and thus a sense of belonging. This includes integration into school and the promotion of children's individual strength and a fostering of their esteem. We need to support parents during and after war. And this is a quite obvious one, but still important to underline. We need to support parents. Overall, studies have consistently documented the protective nature of parental support on the mental health of children in armed conflict. And thus promoting healthy development of war-affected children should also and always focus on supporting their parents and including them in any sort of intervention if possible. Especially helping parents to maintain warm interactions despite war atrocities and thus limiting harshness in interaction with their children as much as possible might foster healthy child adjustment. And to add another obvious point, let's try to advocate for and give our very best to help to reunite families as soon as and as early as possible. War does not only affect those children directly exposed, but also those indirectly impacted through mass media, bringing the pictures of war into every family home. Children indirectly affected by war gladly and mostly are not separated from their families and do not have to leave their friends, their home, their city behind. But they can experience this social threat on the collective level, hearing about missiles and nuclear deterrence, seeing the trouble and anxiety it might cause in their parents. Considering the COVID pandemic and its burden onto children and onto families and onto our health systems with already high levels of anxiety and mental health problems and the reduced quality of life in children and their parents, this current feeling of unsafety has the potential to create a double jeopardy. It comes on top of of the stress that children already have to endure as a result of the pandemic. Vulnerable children and adolescents must thus cope with both war in Europe and the consequences of the COVID pandemic. So how can parents talk to their children? In our opinion, it's important to find a balance between telling the truth about the adversities of war and to still convey hope and signs of physical as well as emotional safety. It is important to protect children from the constant and overwhelming information about the current situation, especially from disturbing images in the media, and to at times turn off one's own devices. Providing relationship opportunities for children in which they can manage emotions, they can talk about feelings and anxiety it causes to them is important. And we will also hear about resources to talk with children about war within the next talk. So what are the implications for child and adolescent psychiatry and mental health services? We need to support our colleagues in Ukraine and in neighboring countries where people are finding refuge in every possible way we can. We need to continue to advocate for and help to address the mental health burden and needs of children. We need to advocate for new funds and resources to address this mental health crisis of children and for large-scale programs to counteract this double jeopardy that we are seeing, having pandemic and war. We also need to be aware of the continuum of crisis within Europe at its borders and worldwide. And to name two, we still have an ongoing refugee crisis around the Mediterranean, with families continuously drowning at our very borders. And we more and more see the impact of climate change and nature catastrophes like floodings and fires around the world impacting the mental health of our children. What we also need to do is to foster sustainability of help efforts and support to build the structures in which such help efforts and interventions can be implemented over time. And thus we need also to care for those who provide care to make help sustainable over time. Together, we need to persistently advocate for children's rights and to invest into the future of the world's children. As in the words of Graça Machel, children are both our reason to eliminate the worst aspects of armed conflict and our best hope of succeeding in that charge. Thank you very much. In regard to the scientific literature presented here, I'd like to refer you to our scoping policy editorial, as this presentation is closely linked to our paper, and we will also make sure to have the slides as well as the script of the talk accessible after this symposium. With this being said, I'll hand back the virtual microphone to Professor Fegert. Thank you very much for all your time, thought, and care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for all that work you invested in that paper. Thank you to all other authors and the members of the board of ESCAP and the policy division. I see in the chat, excellent presentation. Yes, it was an excellent presentation, and thank you very much for doing this. There was quite a number of questions whether we can make these slides accessible. I didn't ask you, but I already wrote that we will put it on the homepage because I think we, in our safe situation, we should share as much as material we have. We possibly should share that. And Dimitris also added that the editorial is free in access. It's produced by Springer in the ESCAP journal, and everybody can download it. And then we had quite a lot of questions where you could get screening instruments in Ukrainian and Russian language, because many of the persons in the eastern part of Ukraine and some parts of Ukraine grow up with Russian language. So we need both languages to cope with the needs of these families. And I hope that our next speakers from my department, Andreas Witt and Thorsten Sukale, in their presentation will come back to that point. I think there was a first note already in the chat. But I'm now very glad, because at the same time when we worked on that paper, our clinical trauma group approached me and said, oh, what can we do? And is there some resources for financing translation and programming of electronic programs and so on? And I'm very proud that within a week, many things have been translated. This is a harsh contrast to the reaction of our government and all the institutions we approached. They told us that at the moment, there's no money in the budget, there are no plans about it. So I fear we will have the same situation like in 2015, that 2 years later, there will a lot of organized support, but we need the interventions and the material now. And therefore, I'm very glad that you, Andreas Witt and Thorsten Sukale, will present at the next part some of these resources and your approach. Andreas, you will start, I suppose? Yeah, okay. And you are sharing your screen to show slides. Excellent, that seems to work. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can understand me. Do you hear me? Perfect. So thank you very much for the invitation and for Thorsten and I to present on what we've worked on. As practitioners and also as researchers, we knew that at some point we would be confronted with the consequences of this war. And it was quite quick when our therapists approached us and asked how they should talk to children about war in that context. So we started working on those materials, and we looked into the material of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network that was available, and translated it very quickly. The good thing, there are a lot of resources right now out there, and I've looked in a lot of those materials, and the good thing is that there's a broad overlap between the different materials. So I think this is very important that we have a broad consensus about what is out there. So I present about the translations we made, and Thorsten is later on going to present about Porta, the online screening tool, which also contains versions of a trauma screen in Ukrainian and Russian. So by working on the materials, we were guided by a framework. Actually, we oriented ourselves at the research of prototypical trajectories after adversity. You probably know the research from George Bonanno, which usually identifies 4 types of trajectories: chronic, delayed, recovery, and also resilient trajectories. And the percentages between those trajectories may vary by the type of adversity. We know a higher trauma load predicts a higher trauma symptoms. And also this research was done with adult populations, but we see similar patterns in children. So for example, we just finished a review on trajectories after natural disasters, and we found the same presentation there. So I think it is important to have initial interventions to promote resilience and recovery in those affected. I think it is important to have an ongoing screening process with follow-up assessments to detect chronic or delayed reactions. And we need to be prepared for crisis interventions in inpatient units. I think it is important to have interpreter resources there, and also interpreter-assisted EVTs. There's a lot of EVTs available, and from the crisis in 2015, we know that it really works well with those who have longer reactions. So now to the supportive material. There's a lot of material out there, as I've said before. We have materials for victims, psychological first aid, and there are a couple of apps available right now, also translated. And I've put a lot of those materials in this presentation that we can share, so you can click on. I think it is important, as I've said before, to have diagnostic material, interpreters, and also screening tools, and also families who are not directly affected by war. And what I've seen as well is that, for example, a university provides supervision for therapists working with war-affected children. Today, we wanted to focus on these three major points, and Thorsten is going to present about the diagnostics later on, and I'm going to show what we've translated on basis of the documents of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So it has been basically three materials. So the first document is called Talking to Children About War. I think it is helpful for all families, also for families who are not directly affected. And it is now available in English, German, Russian, Ukrainian, and also Japanese. So there's a Japanese group who also translated it. And it's available on the homepage of the NCTSN. The second one is After Crisis, Helping Children Heal. And I think that is a very wonderful resource for families who are in this current situation. It's also available in a lot of languages, also in German, Russian, Ukrainian, Romanian, Pashto-Dari. So a lot of resources. And the third that we were working on was the age-related reactions to traumatic events. And this provides psychoeducation and is also helpful for affected families, but also for carers and people in the environment of those families, also in longer terms. And it's available also in English, German, Russian, Ukrainian, Pashto and Dari. And now we are working on a further document on grief. So talking to children about war, on the right-hand side, you can see the document. It has 4 points, and it talks about potential impact and consideration. For example, as the war that is now going on may act as a trauma reminder also for other affected people, for example, refugees from Syria or people who have been affected by the Balkan War. There might be an increased worry in military family, and especially in families with family in the Ukraine and Russia, because you don't really know what is going on and how the situation may develop in the near future. So those might be very important samples of people to focus. The second point is how to talk to children about war, actually. And the first point that is stressed here is to start the conversation and to clear up misunderstandings. I think when you look into the media, you can all see that the point is stressed that it's a war within Europe, so basically within our own frontier. And very small children might misunderstand that and might be fearful of really having war actions in their front yard. So I think this is very important also to provide context. There's a lot of information also for children available, and it is important as parents to talk to their children about it. And another point is, for example, to monitor adult conversation. Children are very perceptive, and so it is always important to monitor who's listening to what you're saying to other people. And a very important point actually is understanding media exposure. We know that media coverage may be a threat to children's health as well. We know that children may be traumatized by seeing very harsh pictures. So it is important to monitor media coverage. And now with social media, there's a lot of potential for children to get into contact to very disturbing pictures as well. and the caregivers need to support their children in an adequate use. And it also provides information on how to foster resilience. And we know from trauma research that social support is a huge resilience factor. Therefore, it's always important to increase connections and also to emphasize the helpers. So the situation leads to the feeling of helplessness in a lot of people. And I think it is good to see that so many people are keen to help and that a lot of people want to help. And so you can talk to your children on how you want to help, potentially. And the third point is always, and which is always necessary, is to keep to routines, and because it provides basic structure and helps children to go along. And of course, to offer patience. The second document is After Crisis, Helping Children Heal, which I think is really a wonderful resource. It is worked along the safety acronym. It was kind of difficult for us to have the same translation in German, but we managed it. And S stands for safety first, and I will go into the points in more detail afterwards. The A for allow expression and of feelings, follow your child's lead, enable your child to tell a story of what happened during and after. I think this is a point where you can see that having a narrative, having a coherent story is important. We all know from the research of Antonovsky that sense of coherence is important, and having a coherent story is very important. And then again, the ties, so the social support is very important. Reconnect with supported people from your community, from your culture, and your child needs you. So safety first is about to hold the child, let it stay close, tell them you will take care of them. Provide familiar things, protect from frightening media, and also provide transparency and routine. So transparency to a point where it is possible to provide information what is going to happen next, and also when you have to leave, where you're going and when you will be back, and be reliable on that. Also allow for expression. I think the crisis, it's very clear that, and I think this sentence really states it perfectly, difficult feelings mean difficult behavior. And so it's perfectly normal for children to act out in such a situation. But this might also mean more difficulties or more stress for parents, actually. And an important point is for parents to help children name how they feel and to guide them how they should behave, to express their anger in a way it won't hurt anybody. And it is also important to talk about things that are actually going well. So seeing some good stuff in all the crazy stuff that is going on in this situation. Follow your child's lead. So different children need different things. That's very clear. And it's important to listen and to observe to find out what the child actually needs in this situation. One of the core points, I think, is to enable the child to tell the story of what happened. Having a story helps to make sense and to cope with it. Yeah, and this can happen in very different ways, and it is necessary for the parents to support their children in what happened and also how they felt. And it is also important to leave rooms. And also that can be very disturbing for parents as well. So it is also important to look, as a parent, to look for yourself. As I said before, social support is always stressed. It is important to reconnect with supportive people, communities, cultures, rituals. So keep to routines, have familiar bedtime stories, songs, or prayers. They all offer hope to children. Find connections such as religious groups. I think this is a good starting point. And an important point is parents help their children the most if they also take care of themselves. which is an important point. And the last point, your child needs you. It's very important, and to reassure the child that you won't be separated, that you will be together, and that is okay for the child. Also clingy or worried, and just being there as a parent can help your child. And it is very important for the parents to be transparent and reliable. When you leave, you have to state where you go, when you will be back, and it would be good to leave something that belongs to you, to the child, so it can really feel safe about it. The third resource that we have is the age-related trauma reactions. I think it provides very good basic psychoeducation of age-related trauma reactions for preschool children, school-age children, and also adolescents. It helps to normalize the behavior, which I think is important. It gives some meaning to what is happening to the child. It provides psychoeducation and gives information on how to help. And I think an important message here is that trauma reactions are normal reactions to very abnormal events. And that is something that we find very useful in our everyday clinical context with traumatized children. And I think it's important to stress this. So now, this was my very quick run through those resources. As I said, there are a lot more resources. We'll put links into it. And I will now hand over to you, Thorsten.
Thank you, Andy. And I speak to you directly out of the office from Paul Plener in Vienna. Vienna is calling. Hi, Paul. First of all, I want to say thank you to Andreas Witt and Jörg Fegert. It's always a great pleasure to work with you in these projects. Now I want to tell you something about PORTA. PORTA stands for Providing Online Resource and Trauma Assessment for Refugees, and it's an online screening tool you can use as a therapist, as a teacher, as a social worker. And the idea we had in 2015 was to make an easy tool, to create an easy tool to talk about difficulties or symptoms which we see in the daily living from the refugees. And we have included some questionnaires. Perhaps, Andy, you can go on to the questionnaires because we have not so much time. Because there was one question about the cats in the chat. What we can do is assessments by others. There you can use the cats for the younger children, cats from 3 to 6 years, the cats from 7 to 17, and the SDQ. We have all questionnaires in 10 languages, and we did it in 1 week, also in Russian and Ukraine. You have the self-assessment for parents. That's, I think, also very important to look for the mothers, especially of the Ukrainian child, to look if they had depressions or trauma symptoms. Go on with the next slide. We have an AMPEL screening, traffic light system, where we talk about other questions, especially the psychosocial situation, also about feelings of the loneliness or other very important symptoms where you can manage it with the AMPEL and can look if it is in a red light, in a yellow or a green light. Here you can also see the 10 languages we can offer the questionnaires. And the good thing is, when you fill out the questionnaires, you get the results immediately. So you see also immediately what's the result, and if there are trauma symptoms, if there are depressed symptoms or whatever. Okay. Yes, go on. That's the result of the cats, for example. So you see the re-experience, avoidance, negative cognitions, arousal, and you can see what is where is yes, and you can manage therapy, for example. Andy told us about our materials. We also translated on our homepage. You also see a manual called Start Kids from Dixius and Eva Müller. From there you can see some ideas for emotion regulations for children's. We have the Huggy Puppy intervention. We planned to include in a low level intervention. It's very important to do ongoing screenings, and we want to teach also therapists for evidence-based therapies, especially for the trauma-focused therapy. Okay, and now the time is over.
Yeah, so here you can see the links so Professor Feckert already said that we are going to share the presentation, so you can click onto them. And we want to thank you for your attention, and also we want to acknowledge the NCTSN, who is always providing really good resources in this context, and also to our people who translated the stuff very quickly and supported us very quickly. So thank you for the attention.
Yes, Andreas and Thorsten, thank you very much for that quick overview on the resources. Thank you to Paul for hosting Thorsten in Vienna. Paul Plener was one of the first colleagues in Europe who approached me whether we could activate our e-learning programs for trauma-informed care for professionals and laypersons that support people. So there's a European network, and I'm really glad that we have that meeting today together. And now we will start with the panel discussion, and I ask Stefan Eliès to start his video, Anne-Marie Raberg from Denmark to start her video, and Ben Vitiello from Torino in Italy. Yeah, everybody is here. And perhaps if you have already seen Dimitris and me, so perhaps we start with Anne-Marie Christensen, who was the first in our group of the ESCAP board to say just 1 day or 2 days after the war started, we have to do something, and what could we do? About your impressions from your country and your comments about the things we heard until now. Anne-Marie, would you like to start?
Yes, I'll introduce myself. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist outside Copenhagen. I have worked before with refugees, unaccompanied children, and children from Afghanistan and children from Syria and in Syria, yeah. But usually I work as a child and adolescent consultant here in the acute emergency ward in Copenhagen. And I was sitting preparing for one of the ESCAP conferences, and it seemed so surreal that all of a sudden we had this war coming in and a huge impact of refugees. And I think the challenge in this case is that we get a lot more, we can expect a lot more children than from a war zone than we're used to at in a very short time. So I would be interested in maybe asking you a bit, how have you been discussing going about this? I like the screening instruments a lot. I use SDQ, which is there in Ukrainian already, but also like the trauma schedules. We have to remember that PTSD develops after some time. So right here now, it's the psychological first aid that we should focus on. But what we're struggling with is who's going to provide this service or screening. The refugees come by themselves, or they come in little groups. They get spread all over the country, and they have to get safety first, as you mentioned, and get settled in. But then we're discussing who's going to sort of screen them for mental problems. I don't wonder if you have discussed that, especially also because some of these children who will come, they will already have developmental disorders, and they'll be especially vulnerable. And how do we get in touch with them? Is it going to be with the GP, the public nurse, the school system, the psychologist, or have you? What do you do around Europe? Yeah, and maybe especially to our guest from Ukraine, what will she recommend? How will we get in touch with the families?
Perhaps we start with the last question, Anne-Marie. Yeah. And I asked Lydia to come to my side. Yes, how should we start to get in contact with the families? Do you have an idea?
We have a contact in the shelters, in the big shelters with the families which need help in the status they are living in Germany. And also we invited people who want to communicate or need help for a special party, like which organized my hostel in a church. And we invited also German people and Ukrainian refugees to communicate, to make first connection. And also we have public groups in Facebook or WhatsApp, and there maybe
that's the sort of thing I would like to know. So Facebook and WhatsApp, that's a good tool to come out. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. And I think your other question, how we serve these people when they need therapeutic services within our systems, my approach here is trying to hire her so she can work in our system. Therefore, the last week we really focused on getting the papers and getting all the certificates translated and getting the official papers to work here, and then to integrate you to our team so that there is supervision, but there is also a native speaker and the person with that experience, because I think that will have much more acceptance. And if we do it right, finally, after all these hurdles in administration, in the end, this will be paid by the health system. But before we can get money for it, we have to make you a co-worker, an official co-worker of our department, so that all the rules of the healthcare system in Germany apply to your work. But that's our aim. Now we are doing first aid and we're doing a lot of improvised things. And I'm very grateful that my team is doing a lot, and everybody, we had so many comments now in the internet, everybody is doing something. But I think we should struggle for real structures within our system to give that support. So now I see Ben Vitiello on the video. It's good to have you here, Ben. And as always, you have been very helpful in writing up that paper with all your experience. And what is the situation in Italy, and what is your impression?
Well, we are trying to make our services available to refugees from Ukraine. We haven't had that many so far, just a few. And what we got so far are children who were displaced, and they already had problems because of epilepsy or neurodevelopmental disorders when they're in Ukraine. And then their care has been discontinued or anyway disrupted. And so the epilepsy became uncontrolled. And so we had a child, for instance, with epilepsy that was hospitalized yesterday evening. And apparently we're trying to figure it out if it is due to the fact that he didn't receive appropriate medication and the levels of medication just fell below the therapeutic ones. But this is an example that we try, we are a hospital, we are a university hospital, and we try to do what we can. We are located closer to France, so we are not really in the east part of Italy, so it's possible that over there they see right now more refugee from Ukraine. I think that the example that you have given from Ulm to try to integrate native speakers into your staff, it's a wonderful one. I think it's an ingenious one. So I think it's a great example. Besides that, we are trying to figure it out. Our government has facilitated the enrollment of refugees, especially minors, into the national health system with no documents. So as long as they are children, they come from Ukraine, no need of passport, no need, because they understand that maybe they don't have the documents at that time ready, and so they can receive basically a social security number that allows them to receive full coverage for the health care that we can provide. So we try to do what we can in this respect. Besides that, I think that the presentation this afternoon, the one by David and by Andreas, they have lined out all the key issues of this unfortunate story, which is not new because, wars happen all the time. It's just we are so upset about this because it's so close to us, but the statistics say that 1 in 10 children in the world suffer from a direct impact from war in human. So it's a very common, unfortunately, situation that in Europe occurred when there was the former Yugoslavia crisis, and now it's happening because of Ukraine, and may happen, hope not, they may happen again in the future. So it's very frustrating because we know how damaging this phenomenon, which is a human-induced phenomenon, is not a natural disaster. It's something that is caused by human behavior, and we as society in general, we haven't been able to contain this, to eliminate this cause of major disruption. So there is an element of frustration, obviously, that we have, and so doing something is helpful not only for these children, but also for us.
Yes, that's a good end of your intervention, and thank you for reminding us that international perspective and that perspective that Lydia Kuznetsova already mentioned, that question, why now, why these questions that children ask us, this is not a natural catastrophe, it's a man-made disaster, and we have to cope with. But you, Ben, also raised the question of children that need physical health care. We have in Ulm at our university hospital, I think about 10 children with cancer that absolutely needed treatment, and we took them over from a university hospital in Ukraine. And I think there is also a need of psychosocial support for these children. So we should build and instruct our liaison services that work in pediatrics, in oncology, to support these colleagues that are now supporting these children. And as Annemarie mentioned, we also have the problem of handicapped children. I don't know how the situation is in other countries, but in Germany and in Poland, there were buses of children coming from institutions. And it's very difficult to form new groups and to have buildings where you can place them together. And for these children, you have special needs that have to be fulfilled. And I think that's also a situation where we should support the colleagues that try now in the institutions in our countries to give refuge to these children. So I think these are very, very important points that we should perhaps summarize after this meeting. I now go on to Stefan Elias. I hope he's here. I don't see his video. Yes,
I'm here.
There's a thumb on the video, but I think we will see you soon. What's the situation in Switzerland? What are your comments on the situation, Stefan?
So we do have we now do have lots of family arriving. I think one concern we really have is the possibility to integrate those children in the school system as soon as possible. So I have to say that there was really solidarity, and many families volunteered to have children, families coming in their home. I think this was really the political vision to favor integration directly in the families rather than going through structures like we did in other refugee situation. And now one of the question is how do we I would say, how could it say that, integrate, blend in these children as quickly as possible in the school system, including the university system. So for example, University of Geneva is now doing a program to integrate med students on the flow so that they can continue their studies and that they can move on, that they get the sense to be able to move on with their projects. So I think this is really the main concerns that have been brought up politically. For the clinical work, it is yet difficult to really assess what it means at the national level. I guess we will go into a survey and analysis to be really able to understand. We did not yet, I would say that we don't yet have significant demands regarding children, adolescents, and families. We had some demands about children with special needs like autism. How can we set something into place to allow them to take advantage of the health and educational system that they need? Okay, so I think this is where we stand right now.
Thank you, Stefan. We had problems with your video, but we understood you very well. And I think it's really important to think about the school situation. But in some way, it's difficult because all our experiences, especially in Germany, were based on integration and language acquisition. So to learn easy German, to be able to communicate. And in some way, this is important because the children have to move in the city, take the bus and so on. But on the other hand, I think there are resources with people fleeing from Ukraine to teach children in their language. And we know from inclusive schools that we have children in one class, in one classroom with different tasks. And for example, Ukrainian children could be part of a class, but work on their material. And perhaps we should also think about counseling in that field, that every way making schooling accessible for these children is very important, because as you said, the normal rituals, getting up, going to school in the evening, going to bed, having meals together, this is what is very helpful against anxiety. So every kind of normality in that completely abnormal situation is helpful. So thank you, Stefan, for raising this point. Dimitris, how is the situation in Greece?
Thank you, Jörg. I would like to ask my colleagues from Greece who are in this session with us if they want to comment on this. Besides me, it will be much better, because frankly speaking, I'm very ambivalent how to respond to your question, because from one hand, there is specific good things relating to Ukrainian refugees. From the other hand, still in my country, there are no so good attitudes towards the other refugees from other parts of the globe. So this is why I think that maybe some of my colleagues respond in a better and more appropriate way, because I'm a little bit biased. But if you want me to concentrate what is going on with our colleagues from and our co-citizens from Ukraine, they are very welcome. Fortunately, in Greece, nowadays, there is a quite vivid and well-integrated Ukrainian community all over Greece, and especially in Athens. And this is a great advantage for Ukrainian people to come in Greece and immediately or in a very short time to be with their relatives here in Greece, combines the fact that our government, as I said, has a very open policy towards Ukrainian refugees, and this is very, very, very good. Also, you know, as you said in the beginning, Georg, Ukrainian people has the right and the very fair wish and hope to be back as soon as possible. And we must stand by them to their wish and hope as individuals, as national societies, as ESCAP. I think that this is the best solution for refugees from Ukraine. And this makes me frankly speaking, that we must take a stance clear, without question marks or second thoughts, against this war. I think, speaking personally, not as a president of ESCAP or as a president of my national society or representative of the Greek child psychiatric community, okay, I am speaking from my only for myself. So this is the situation now in Greece. But if I have to add something, or I have to add something at the closing comments, Jörg, now, maybe better later. Okay.
Okay, thank
So,
you, Dimitris. But I think it's very important that you mention that we have in our countries a proportion of refugees still that came with their families or came as unaccompanied minors, and that we should not have a hierarchy between different refugees and how we treat them and how we support them and help them, because the motives of support are universal motives, as has been shown with the UN Convention of Children's Rights. Yeah, so I think that's a very, very important point, because there are different reactions in many countries. And for us, and I'm speaking for the policy division of ESCAP, it's very important that we start from the needs of children, and not from the nationality and their background. And all the things that had been said about the flight situation are true for all refugees. Yeah, and we should treat them equally if possible. So is there anybody from Greece who wanted to comment on the Greek situation? As Dimitris said, or we had some persons very active in the chat. There was a music therapist that he said that nonverbal, or she said that nonverbal therapies might be very, very helpful at that moment. And there was Matthias Köster, who intervened several times and always asked structural questions. How do we bring together initiatives? How we can go up to the government level? What are our means to organize help and support in Europe? So if you have answers to this question, I think that would be very helpful. But now I see a Greek colleague raising her or his hand, as I can't read.
It's our colleague Bolias Konstantinos, very distinguished Greek child psychiatrist.
That's what I wanted to say, but I don't read Greek, so
yeah.
That's my problem,
So
Dimitris. Thank you.
If it is okay with you, Jörg, please, Kostas, speak to us.
It's Mariana Tassi.
Okay. Mariana Tassi, the other part of Kostas. The two of them are.
Okay, it's from Costa Center, and I'm talking from there. I just wanted to good evening, everybody, and congratulations for this symposium. Very, very important and very helpful. Just wanted to say that we have had quite a long experience in the island of Chios, working with refugees from Syria. It's too early yet to speak about support of refugees from Ukraine. What has helped a lot is actions for community education and sensitization. A lot of actions in the community, which actions have helped in changing a little bit of how can we say, Dimitris, help me.
The attitude towards refugees, they became more friendly, more open to accept them.
Yes.
And this is true.
This is the only thing that I can think of telling about that, because I agree, Dimitris, that there is different, at different times, different attitudes towards refugees from parts as Africa. Also, the center Ένα παιδί, ένας κόσμος, One Child, One World, has worked for many years in supporting children, refugee children from Nigeria, from Philippines, from different parts of the world, and supporting mothers, making mother groups so that they can help their children, and also paying visits at homes of mothers and children from different parts of the world, and providing support at the home environment. That's what I can say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before I hand over to Dimitris for the last words in that meeting, I think that was an improvised session with a very, very good quality. And I would like to thank all those who participated. I also would like to thank my secretaries, my technician, Mrs. Lohrmann, because under high pressure they organized the technical side of that meeting. I wanted to thank Zoom that they allowed us even much more space. We had at the best times around 200 participants. I think that's very excellent for an improvised meeting. But as I read in the chat, we have not enough colleagues from Poland, for example. Yesterday, I had an interview with a journalist from a large Polish journal, and she told me that at the moment 700,000 children from Ukraine are in Poland, and they have to care for these children and to create a safe place. So perhaps in a month, it might make sense, or two, especially at our meeting in Maastricht, our Congress, where everybody should join us. We